All right, so today we're diving deep into the world of Antonio Rosmini,
Oh, yeah, Rosmini.
this 19th century Italian philosopher.
It's
And
a huge figure.
yeah, he really was. And, we're not just going to skim the surface here, right? We're going deep into his ideas on knowledge, being, morality, the whole shebang.
We're going to unpack it all.
Exactly. And lucky for us, we've got expert speaker here to guide us through this philosophical labyrinth.
Happy to be here.
So to kick things off, can you give us a little background on Rosmini? Like, who was this guy and what was he all about?
Well, Rosmini was a really interesting figure. He was a priest deeply devoted to his faith, but also a philosopher who really championed the power of reason.
So not your typical priest then?
Not exactly. He believed that a solid philosophical foundation was absolutely crucial for understanding theological truths, and vice versa, that faith could illuminate aspects of philosophy that reason alone might miss.
So he wasn't trying to like compartmentalize faith and reason?
No, no.
He was looking for a genuine synthesis between the two.
Exactly. He saw them as complementary, not contradictory.
I like that.
And to really understand his approach, we need to start with his concept of being the absolute bedrock of his philosophical system.
Okay. Let's dive into that. It sounds pretty fundamental,
It is.
but I have a feeling it's way more nuanced than it seems at first glance.
Oh, you're absolutely right.
So what's the significance of being in Rosmini's framework?
Well, for Rosmini, being is the most fundamental concept, the starting point for all knowledge. He argues that we have this innate idea of being hardwired into us, and this idea acts as a lens through which we perceive and understand the world. It's objective, it exists independently of our minds, and it interacts with our sensory experiences to form our understanding of reality.
So it's not just a matter of passively receiving sensory data, like there's an active mental process going on shaped by this pre-existing idea of being.
Precisely, he was pushing back against the empiricists of his time, thinkers like Locke and Condillac, who emphasized sensory experience as the primary source of knowledge.
Right.
Rosmini believed they didn't fully account for the role of reason and innate ideas in shaping our understanding.
That's fascinating. So it seems like he was trying to strike a balance between pure reason and pure experience.
Yeah.
But wouldn't relying on innate ideas make knowledge subjective? Like if we all have different lenses, so to speak, wouldn't we end up with multiple conflicting truths?
That's a great question, and that's where the objectivity of being comes in. Rosmini believed that this idea of being wasn't something that we individually construct, but rather a universal principle, a fundamental truth embedded within us. He uses this analogy of a mother teaching her child about flowers.
Okay.
She wouldn't start by naming every single type of flower. She'd begin with the general concept flower and then branch out into specifics.
I see. So the idea of being is like that initial concept of flower. It provides a foundational framework for understanding all the specific forms of being that we encounter in the world.
Precisely, and this emphasis on an objective foundation for knowledge is what sets Rosmini apart from many of his contemporaries.
This is really intriguing. So if being is the bedrock of knowledge, how does that connect to Rosmini's ideas about truth and certainty? Because let's face it, certainty is a pretty slippery concept in philosophy.
Oh, absolutely. You're right. Certainty is a key issue for Rosmini. He argues that true knowledge rooted in this objective idea of being inherently leads to certainty. He distinguishes between two types of persuasion, one based on reason, which leads to certainty, and the other based on error, which can lead to false convictions. For Rosmini, true knowledge aligns with the truth, providing a firm and unshakable foundation for our beliefs.
So it's not just about having a strong opinion.
No.
It's about grounding that opinion in a reasoned understanding of being, of how things actually are.
Exactly, and this is where his concept of the will comes into play. Rosmini believed that the will, our capacity to choose, could either align with the truth, leading to moral good, or deviate from it, resulting in error and immorality.
So the will isn't just about making choices, it's also about our fundamental orientation towards truth. And I'm guessing this ties into his ideas about human dignity.
Absolutely. Rosmini argues that the will, as the supreme active principle within us, is what defines our personhood. It's our capacity to choose to adhere to the truth we know that elevates us and gives us dignity.
Okay, I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together. He's building a whole system here with being as the foundation leading to certainty, which then informs our will and shapes our understanding of human dignity. It's quite a complex but coherent framework.
It is.
And I imagine this is just the tip of the iceberg.
Oh, yeah.
Rosmini takes these foundational concepts and applies them to a vast range of topics.
Well, yes, he does.
From morality to politics to theology. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's delve deeper into his notion of the will.
Let's do it.
I'm all ears.
So we talked about how, for Rosmini, the will is super central to human dignity.
Right.
But it's not just about, like, having a will.
Right.
It's about aligning that will with truth. And this is where his concept of moral good comes in.
Okay. I'm intrigued. How does Rosmini define moral good, then, in relation to the will and truth?
Well, for him, moral good arises when our will is in harmony with the order of being, with the truth of how things are. He contrasts this with what he calls eudaimonological good, which focuses more on, like, individual desires and self-interest.
So it's not just about what feels good or what benefits me personally.
Right.
It's about a deeper alignment with the greater truth.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that there's this objective order to reality, and moral good stems from aligning our will with that order.
This reminds me of other ethical systems that emphasize duty or virtue.
Yeah.
But how does Rosmini's concept of conscience play into this?
Oh, conscience. That's a crucial element in Rosmini's ethical framework. He defines conscience as a judgment on the morality of our actions, a way of assessing whether our choices are in line with what we know to be true.
But couldn't conscience be subjective?
Yeah.
I mean, we all have different experiences and beliefs that shape our understanding of right and wrong. So how does Rosmini address that potential for individual variation?
He acknowledges that conscience can indeed be mistaken. It's not an infallible guide. He emphasizes the need for careful formation of conscience, for constantly examining and potentially correcting our moral judgments.
So it's not about blindly following whatever our conscience tells us.
No.
It's about engaging in critical reflection and making sure our conscience is properly informed.
Precisely. And this is where things get really interesting. Rosmini argues that a deliberately misleading conscience cannot morally be followed. So there are situations where it becomes a moral imperative to question and potentially correct our conscience.
That's a pretty bold statement.
Yeah.
It suggests that there's a higher moral standard that even our own conscience must be held accountable to.
Yes, and that standard for Rosmini is rooted in the objective truth of being. Remember, our will should be aligned with that truth, and our conscience should reflect that alignment.
Right, okay, so we've got this interconnected system being truth, will, conscience, and moral good. It's like this complex ethical ecosystem.
Yeah.
But how does this translate to Rosmini's views on society and human rights?
That's a great question for Rosmini. The individual, with their inherent dignity and capacity for moral choice, is the foundation of society.
Okay.
He sees each person as a subsistent right, meaning an end in themselves, and not a means to an end. This means every individual possesses inherent inalienable rights simply by virtue of being human.
So it's not the state or any other external authority that grants these rights.
No.
They're inherent within us. This sounds a bit like natural rights theory.
You're on the right track. He's drawing on that tradition, emphasizing that these rights aren't bestowed by governments or social contracts. They're fundamental to our very nature as human beings.
Right.
And he distinguishes between innate rights, those we have from birth, and acquired rights, those we gain through our actions and interactions within society.
But regardless of their source, I'm guessing Rosmini believed that all rights must be respected and upheld.
Absolutely. For him, a just society is one that recognizes and protects these inherent rights. He envisions the state as a protector of individual rights, ensuring that the modality of those rights might be adjusted for the common good. Think, for example, about eminent domain, where property might be taken for a road, but with fair compensation.
Right.
The key is that essential rights, like the right to life, can never be violated.
So there's this delicate balance between individual rights and the needs of the collective, with clear boundaries to protect the inherent dignity of each person.
Precisely, and this is where his critique of totalitarianism comes in. Rosmini was vehemently opposed to any system that subordinates the individual to the state or the collective.
I can see why that kind of system would directly contradict his entire framework of individual dignity and inherent rights.
Exactly. He believed those systems fundamentally violate the very essence of what it means to be human.
So if a totalitarian system is a no-go, did Rosmini have any thoughts on what a just political system would look like?
He didn't advocate for a specific system, but he did offer some insightful critiques. He challenged the simplistic notion of one person, one vote as the defining principle of democracy, believing that a truly just system would consider the contributions citizens make to the well-being of society.
So more nuanced than just counting heads, it's about recognizing the value and agency of each individual within the social fabric.
Precisely, and he also cautioned against blindly following public opinion. He argued that public opinion can be fickle, swayed by emotions and short-term desires, and it's the responsibility of leaders to guide society towards what's truly good and just.
Wow, that's incredibly relevant today with the constant barrage of information and opinions we're exposed to. It's a call for critical thinking and responsible leadership.
Absolutely. Rosmini's insights challenge us to think deeply about how we form our opinions, how we engage in social decision-making, and how we uphold principles of justice and human dignity in an increasingly complex world.
It's clear that Rosmini was a deep thinker who grappled with some of the most fundamental questions about human existence. His philosophical system, with its emphasis on being truth, will, and conscience, is intricate and thought-provoking. But there's another dimension we need to explore: his foray into the realm of natural theology.
You're right. Rosmini, being a priest as well as a philosopher, couldn't avoid tackling the big questions about God. And here's where we see his rigorous philosophical framework applied to theological concepts.
It should be interesting. I'm eager to hear how he bridges the gap between reason and faith. So we've explored Rosmini's ideas about being and knowledge and morality and society, but now we're stepping into the realm of natural theology. How did a philosopher so focused on reason approach the concept of God?
Well, he didn't shy away from those traditional arguments for God's existence. He meticulously examined both a posteriori proofs, the ones based on observations of the world, and a priori proofs, those rooted in pure reason.
That's a pretty rigorous approach.
Yeah.
Did he favor one over the other?
While acknowledging the validity of a posteriori arguments, like the design argument, for instance, he leaned towards a priori reasoning, especially arguments stemming from, you guessed it, the idea of being.
Oh, back to being. It really is the cornerstone of his entire philosophical system.
It is, think about it this way, if we have this innate idea of infinite being, of perfection completeness, then there must be a source for that idea, an infinite mind capable of imparting it to us. That infinite mind, Rosmini concludes, is God.
Okay, I'm following. It's like he's taking his foundational principle and applying it to the ultimate question, the question of a first cause. But how did Rosmini reconcile this philosophical idea of God with his religious beliefs? Did he see any conflict between faith and reason?
Not at all. For Rosmini, faith doesn't negate reason, it actually completes and elevates it. He saw philosophy as a tool for illuminating and deepening our understanding of theological truths.
So a harmonious relationship, not a battle for supremacy.
Exactly. He believed that divine revelation could shed light on areas of philosophy that reason alone might miss.
That makes sense. It's like they're two sides of the same coin, both contributing to a fuller picture of reality. And this leads us to the age-old problem of theodicy, how to reconcile the existence of evil with the idea of a benevolent God. This is a question that has plagued theologians and philosophers for centuries.
You're right, and Rosmini didn't shy away from this challenge. He tackled it head-on in his work Theodicy, where he lays out this framework for understanding God's justice and goodness in a world where both good and evil exist.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Yeah.
What's his take on this perennially thorny issue?
Well, he posits a series of divine laws governing providence, God's interaction with the world. One of his key principles, borrowed from Thomas Aquinas, is the law of the least. Means this law states that God accomplishes his purposes in the most efficient way possible.
Okay, so no wasted effort, no unnecessary complexity, but how does that explain the presence of evil?
Rosmini argues that this principle leads to other laws, like the law of excluded superfluity, the permission of evil, and the law of heroism.
Those sound pretty dense. Can you unpack those a bit?
Essentially, these laws help explain how God orchestrates both universal good, the overall well-being of creation, and the particular good of individuals, even amidst the presence of evil. It's a complex system, but the core idea is that God allows evil to exist not because he desires it, but because it's somehow necessary for the greater good.
I see. It's a difficult concept to wrap your head around, but I can appreciate his attempt to grapple with this fundamental problem. It's like he's creating this intricate philosophical and theological tapestry, weaving together these complex ideas.
And he doesn't stop there in his later unfinished work, Theosophy. He dives even deeper into the concept of being, and this is where he takes on some of the philosophical giants of his time, Hegel and Schelling.
Oh, the philosophical gauntlet is thrown. I'm sensing some intellectual fireworks here.
Rosmini really took issue with their idealist philosophies, particularly their emphasis on the role of human thought in shaping reality. He argued that they overemphasized the power of the human mind, reducing all of reality to a projection of our own thoughts.
So he pushed back against the idea that we as finite beings can somehow encompass the totality of being through our thinking.
Exactly. He argued for a more nuanced relationship between human thought and absolute being, between our finite minds and the infinite mind of God.
I'm really seeing the depth of his thinking here. He wasn't just accepting philosophical trends, he was critically engaging with them and carving his own path.
Absolutely. And to clarify his approach, Rosmini breaks down the study of being into three distinct branches: ontology, rational theology, and cosmology.
Okay, that's helpful. Can you break those down for us?
Ontology is the study of being in its most general sense, the fundamental principles of existence. Rational theology builds upon that foundation, focusing specifically on the concept of God as subsistent being the ultimate source of all being. And finally, cosmology explores the world of finite beings, the universe as we experience it in relation to its ultimate cause.
Wow, that's quite a system. He really thought about everything.
He did, and he brought such rigor and depth to his philosophical explorations. It's amazing to think about how all these pieces fit together: knowledge, morality, society, and even theology, all stemming from this fundamental concept of being.
It's truly inspiring, this dedication to seeking truth in all its forms. And it definitely makes you think about the world and your place in it in a whole new way.
So, before we wrap up, any final thoughts on Rosmini and his legacy?
Rosmini's work, while challenging, offers us a rich and insightful perspective on some of life's biggest questions. He reminds us of the importance of reason, the power of truth, the dignity of the individual, and the interconnectedness of all things. His philosophy, though rooted in the 19th century, still speaks to us today, prompting us to think deeply about the world around us and our role within it.
Well said, and I think that's a perfect note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Antonio Rosmini. It's been an intellectual adventure.
The pleasure was all mine.